Hello and welcome to Really Cool People, a podcast produced by Schweitzer Church. I'm your host, Jason Leininger. This is a place to hear stories of really cool people whose stories are incredibly fascinating. The hope is that you will be inspired, encouraged, and challenged through moments of serendipity. In a sermon entitled The Weight of Glory, C.S. Lewis said, "You and I have never met an ordinary person. You've never met or talked to a mere mortal. It's my joy over the next few moments to introduce you to someone who on the outside may seem ordinary, and yet they are a really cool person. Today, we are going to meet Florence and Annang. I met Florence in 2014 when Schweitzer at that time in its life was asking the question, how can we make a better impact in our community impact ministries? And we were being coached by Rudy Carrasco, who had worked with Florence in Pasadena, California. As I was getting ready to lead a group of people to take a look at some ministries, Rudy said, "You need to meet my friend Florence." And Florence has been indeed a coach. She's shared a lot of insight, and she's become a dear friend and someone who Schweitzer has partnered with in some of the work she's doing in Pasadena. And as we listen to Florence, we'll discover that she was born in Ghana, raised in Great Britain, and now she lives and works and really thrives in Pasadena. So it's a joy to introduce you to my friend, Florence Annang. Today, it is our great joy to welcome Florence Annang to the podcast. And Florence, why don't you begin by telling us about yourself?
Hi, everybody. My name is Florence Annang. I'm born in Ghana, raised in England, and what some people would call a reverse missionary in the United States, in Pasadena, California. I have an after-school and summer camp in community arms, a low-income housing, predominantly African-American and Hispanic. And this will be 2024, my 11th year. And that's my introduction.
That's a very brief introduction for the fullness of your life, Florence. That's great. That is a summary. I've heard that summary of you many times. Why don't you share with us some things about your childhood, about what does it look like to grow up in Ghana or to be born in Ghana?
I was born in Takoradi, which is on by the sea, and most people know it as the Elmino Castles, which is where the slaves, when they were captured from inland, would be taken, and they would be put into the castles, piled on top of each other, and on top of it, which you can still see today, is a church, and it was the Dutch Reformed Church, and they, were one of the leaders in the slave trade, and they would have church every Sunday, but underneath them there were slaves who were, gasping for life, dying, but knowing that they may never return to their homeland. And that's where you will find the door of no return, which is like some people say a window, but it's a door. And once the slaves passed through the door, there was no return. They were going on to the ships. And like I said, Takoradi is, a small village, but if you go there now, it's a bustling community. It's very forward. Thinking, it's lively, it's beautiful, it's everything. It's a tourist destination, but if you go deeper in, it's a village. It's women are cooking, women are selling. They're the first entrepreneurs in the village early in the morning, and they're coming back to take care of their houses, and that's basically where I grew up.
How old were you when you left?
Between
Takoradi.
4 and 5, we came to England, but every summer I came back to Ghana, because my parents wanted me to have the culture ingrained. So, you know, yes, I was in England, but every summer we returned back to Ghana um, to spend my summers there.
When you say your parents wanted you to have the culture ingrained, what were some of the things about the culture that they hoped that you would pick up on or that you would lean into that would be reflected in who you were to become?
I think community, the food, the traditions, the griots. The griots are, some people would say, like the modern day poets, but there wasn't so much writing. So griots would hold the history in their minds and tell people who belonged to whose village, for generation to generation to generation. Um, all of those things, they just wanted me to know that I was Ghanaian first,
Hmm.
but raised, in a different country.
When you reflect back on that time and you think about the place where you're at now, how does Ghana show up in your leadership in the places where you're living in Pasadena and the work that you're a part of in Pasadena? How does Ghana get reflected through that prism?
I think it's about community. I think the solutions are in community. The tension is in community. Um, but moreover, the answers have to be found in community. And that's kind of where Ghana shows up. It's if you, doesn't matter what technology, doesn't matter what is going on, but you're just a conversation away from an argument or a great, healing. And that's something you just have to navigate. And that's something that, going back home made me realize that you you bring community wherever you are, good, bad, or indifferent. And you just have to take responsibility and accountability of the part you play in community.
Yeah. You mentioned when you were describing Takoradi that the place where the slaves would make their departure, on top of that place, there was a Dutch Reformed church. I wonder how did that image of that church shape your understanding of your early understanding of God or your spiritual formation?
Personally, um, kind of not a lot. And it sounds crazy. There should be anger, there should be all of these things, but basically, you don't know what you don't know. They thought that they were right. They thought that God was on their side. They thought that, you know, because they dominated a country at a specific time and they could rule over people, that, like you say, God was in it. Um, and so I think that you can't capture yourself in that, as a community, in that anger or that unknowing. You have to capture yourself with, now, now they know
Hmm.
that it's wrong. Now they know, you know, um, that it wasn't about God. It was about man's greed, man's evilness, man's, doing what man does at times where they can have power. And so it wasn't about God. You know, you can see
Yeah.
that in the Bible all the time. You know, God can stand back and let man do what he's going to do, but in the end of the day, he's going to say, that wasn't right. You didn't need to do all of that. And so I don't think it shaped me. I think it made me just understand that, you know, we serve a God whose grace for us is just overwhelming.
Indeed. So your parents decided to move to England when you were 4 or 5, and do you know what was in the background of their decision in that to make that move?
At the time, it was very simple. England wanted workers from the colonization countries that they had. There were certain jobs that English people just didn't want to do, which was to their detriment. later on. But at the time, they didn't want to be bus drivers. They didn't want to do certain jobs. And so England reached out to the colonies, and, you know, Ghana was an English country. And so my parents, came over to work. But the difference is that they came to, a lot of Africans or West Indian people came to work, but it was never about staying. It was always about, getting to work and then kind of building a home back home and going back home. So you either had some people who had homes in England and homes back home. So they were always returning because it wasn't the end destination.
How long did you end up living in England then?
Basically, elementary, high school, a little bit of college. And then after that, it was just more just traveling and just seeing the world and seeing it for what it is, and having friends over here and family. And so, yeah.
There's a question I like to ask lots of different folks, and it's always interesting. I wonder if you could share what your fourth grade year was like.
Fourth grade.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was fine. I went to like literally an old white school, so there was probably less than 10 black kids in the school. Um, it was fine. I can't really, the teachers, everything about it, because when you come from African parents or African culture, it's about the education. So, you know, you don't go to school to make friends, you go to school to learn. Yeah, it was my fourth grade was my fourth, fifth, sixth. I think for whatever reason, I was able to move through school, and I didn't have the stories of racism. I didn't have any of those things at all, or none that I can remember. But
Hmm.
yeah, it was moreover, um it was about school. It's about school, it's about grades, it's about, when you walked back into my home, it was like mini Ghana. You know, my parents didn't want the parents who were westernized. They were definitely Ghanaian, the food, the culture, the parties, everything. So yeah, it was good.
Huh. That picture. Did you ever watch Ted Lasso on Apple TV?
Uh-huh.
That picture reminds me of the experience of Sam, one of the soccer players, and the restaurant that he puts together. Did that resonate with you at all?
Yeah, a little bit. Yep. Yep. Yeah, a little bit. I mean, like I said, you know, England at that time was just getting an influx of Africans and West Indian people from whatever country was colonized. So there was a newness before there was, okay, this is too much. And that took a few more years, many, many more years for them to
Yeah.
realize that maybe they should have done those jobs, maybe they should have whatever. But yeah, it was yeah, I could see the similarity.
Let's turn now to your time in Pasadena. How did you first off? How did you come from, or how did you find your way from England to Pasadena? What?
I was working for an artist, a music artist called John B, who lived in Pasadena, and so I was going backwards and forwards from England to, Pasadena. And then
Mhm.
eventually, his workload was getting heavy, and so decided to, make me the assistant, and that's how kind of I landed in Pasadena.
I've never heard of John B. What kind of music did he produce or did he
It's
make?
basically a young white soul singer. I mean, most people know him from Babyface, Someone to Love. Um, it was a very strong a single, and then he kind of did really well, and yeah, he did really well.
And then from working with John B, what was your next step?
Well, when I got saved, I just went into church one day, came out was just a little bit different, and what you call pearl making was happening. Everything was an irritant to create, you know, a god pearl. And so I was like, it's time. And, I just decided to leave, found a place in Pasadena, and was able to make that home, and was just trying to pray and figure out next steps. And a friend of mine who lived on Navarro, told me to, go and volunteer at Harambe. And I took a minute. And then eventually I went down there, and the first person that I met was Rudy, and then Derek Perkins.
You want to describe Harambe for the people who listen who won't know anything about it?
Harambe was founded by John Perkins back in the 80s when it was just real drug infested street. And, a gentleman was just, Ray Brown, was just, doing a lot of drugs on that street and in the community. And Mr. Perkins just got hold of the first house on the corner and moved his family in under great resistance, and then just decided to start buying up the block. And when he started to buy up the block, they turned it into Mrs. Perkins had a good news club, and it was the first after school in the city. And it was a place where kids could go, feel safe, and do their homework and all the rest of it. And then that turned into, from after school to a youth center to a school to a preschool. So, yep, Harambe means let's get together and push.
Let's get together and push. Dr. Perkins he's an incredible motivator and somebody who does bring a lot of people together to push many things, many good things. So you mentioned that first person you met there was Rudy, and then Derek Perkins. What did meeting those people mean to you?
I mean, they were just they were just the first people that I met. They were executive directors at the time of the center. And at the time I didn't know what meeting them would be. It just over time, the relationships happen, conversations happen, meeting their families, their lives, and learning how integrated family and ministry was, and the demands. And so I don't think there was an initial aha moment. It was more over time with getting to know them as people and the relationship.
So how would you describe your own life, like before Harambe, and then contrast it with what it was like after Harambe?
I mean, in night and day, but kind of not night and day. I mean, when you're working for a musician, you've got to dot your I's, cross your T's. You're doing all the stuff that needs to get them from A to B. But Harambe was working with kids. Sometimes, when you're working with musicians, you are kind of working with kids. So the practical stuff wasn't different. The deep meaning stuff was very different. The Christ-centered stuff was absolutely night and day. And the longevity of what you were trying to do was very different. On one side, you was You were just getting an outcome. But on the other side of Harambe, you didn't know the outcome. You had to leave it to God and be a part of seeding whatever you were seeding. Um, and the outcome was in God's hands.
So then you've said in the last 11 years, you've been leading an after-school program yourself in Pasadena. What's that experience been like? And what have you learned about yourself in the process?
I think the difference is, when you're in a para ministry, which is Harambe, you're learning to, get support from donors, from churches, from foundations, all the rest of it. But when I chose to go on my own, um, I had to prove that I learned something. Um, and the one thing was about relationships, and you bloom where you're planted. So if you can if you can, dig yourself deep into some place and, you know, and just figure out the earth of that place and let God water it in the relationships, then eventually, God will see it. I mean, obviously, there's hard days. You doing everything by yourself. Harambe was a machine, so to speak. You had staff, you had this, you had that, but it was still, um, a small machine. But founding Thrive Learning Lab of Northwest Pasadena was me. And slowly but surely, getting staff, getting, help from, you know, churches and people um and organizations, all come slowly and surely, but they all come out of relationships. They all come out of a conversation. They all come about God weaving something together to make what he's creating stronger. Um, and that's what I've kind of learned over the 11 years, that it ain't about you. Whether, if this is what God has called you to do, it really isn't about you. It's about um, people, property, and places which God cares about. And if you're in the right place where the people, property, and places are, God will God will see fit for you to bloom, prune, and grow again.
As you've made these movements, as these movements have happened in your life, who are some people that you've come to really admire, and what have been some of the contributions that they've made to what you think about and who you are?
I don't really know if it's the word is admire. I think the word is more that in the relationship they've challenged me to be better. They've challenged me to have different lenses. They've challenged me to um, be uncomfortable. I think that's a better way. Um, you know, Definitely, Rudy and Copy have challenged me when they were there and when they were afar to always go deeper and always understand that just because it looks like the end, it's not the end. It's just a very uncomfortable new beginning. Um, and I think there's a lot of people, community and all the rest of it. But I hold back from actually admiring. I give flowers to people who I see do the work in their own lanes. And the list is long. But yeah, there's people who do the work in their lanes and are very consistent in that work and in their lives is the ones I say I give flowers to um for what they're doing.
Thinking a little bit more about a sense of reflection and purpose is, and coming back to your first story, where you talked about that church sitting atop that the place where the slaves would depart from. What's your picture of God at the moment, and what's God teaching you about Himself in these days?
I think that God is just mainly saying, very simply, He said the first line in the Bible is, God created the heavens and the earth. And then the last line in the Bible is that, He leave the grace of Jesus Christ with us and people. So I see, with us, and
Mhm.
community. And sandwiched between that is 66 books of highs and lows, you know, you know, tunnels and dead ends. But that sandwich, but that first line and that last line is what, you know, God is really teaching, is that He created something for us um to discover, to understand, not to destroy, but to take care of. Um, but in the fickleness of man, he understood in his strategy and plans through 66 books that we were going to need. He couldn't be with us the way that he started.
Mhm.
And so the end result was this grace that makes no sense, even to our foolishness, and that he would never leave us nor forsake us, because he was about community. He was about people. And in the middle of that, he 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 gave us Christ, which wasn't to separate us from him, but was to draw us together. And I think somewhere, I mean, maybe in Revelation's early part, he says, if I knock and you open, I will come in and break bread and be your friend. And I think in this season, it's about that. God is really showing himself to be a friend, but not a pushy friend, not a demanding friend, but just a friend who pop up, knock on the door, and be like, "Hey, can I come in?" And you're like, "Yeah," and like, "What you got to eat? Let's chop it up together." And in those conversations, you understand that there is love. You understand that there is healing. You understand that there's a restorative justice and peace. You understand that there's a joy. And the same way as when the two men who met Jesus on the road to Emmaus, didn't know who he was, but once he broke that bread, they were enlightened. And I think that that's what it is. It's creating spaces for people to break bread with one another, listen to one another, be safe with one another, and hold each other in times and seasons that they can't hold themselves. And so I think that's what I see now, especially after COVID.
Mm-hmm. Well, if God shows up at your door and He says, "Hey, what's for dinner? What's for dinner at Flo's house
I would have said
or in your community?"
black eyed peas, but I went and burnt them yesterday. Um, but it can be anything. It can be a sandwich. It can be, a pizza. It can be a tamale in this season. It can be, tacos. It can be rice and peas and chicken. It can be macaroni and cheese. It can be whatever it is that we will eat and see that the Lord is good. Taste and see that the Lord is good. And while we're, you know, learning how to be good to one another.
Would it ever be Jamaican oxtail soup?
Oh, absolutely. It's
Yeah.
oxtails, it's all of that stuff. It's, I think there's nothing, no culture or their food is above anything. breaking bread and, you know, eating food that crosses culture lines, that, yeah, you taste and see that the Lord is good.
Yeah. As you look out into the future, what are some things that have your attention, that are on your radar? What are some things that you're dreaming about, that you're passionate about, that maybe if you could do something, without any kind of limitations, some things you'd like to accomplish?
I really don't know. I just, I want to, the after school to grow. Um, I want, the kids to um, grow. I want, obviously the resources and the stuff and the grants, the foundations, all of that stuff to grow and encompass more kids, especially in the summertime. I want the structure and the consistency, to just, as I say, maintain and grow stronger. Um, and, more staff, more volunteers, all that great stuff. But I feel like when people ask that question of the future, I think that right about now it's one day at a time. Right about now it's probably 1 week, 1 month at a time. And yes, the Bible says write the vision and make it plain. And I'm trying to figure out that the vision that I wrote is still having the same heartbeat, and and it's definitely necessary for community, and I know it is. So yeah, I don't know if I answered, but
No, that's that sense that that's good, because you're giving us a picture, like in the place where you're living right now, what you're working on, that you see opportunities, and those opportunities, you're trying to leverage those to bring really the goodness of God in a manifest kind of way. So appreciate that. Is there anything that I haven't asked you about that you'd like to speak to? Tell us about yourself, anything.
um, no, I just think that no, I think that there's times people need to understand that when you start something or found something or do whatever it is in community, because I hold a lot of hats in community, is that leadership is lonely, but it's not lonely because sad. It's just lonely because you have to stand on decisions that sometimes don't get understood. You have to stand on decisions that are a little bit ahead of the future, and people have to catch up. Um, um, and you have to stand on decisions that are your mistakes.
Yeah.
um, and I think that for that, but never alone. I think there's a difference of lonely and alone, because God would say He'll never leave us nor forsake us. So if you're alone, then you've separated yourself from the God who loves, and that's our choice. That's something that we have to deal with, whether it's anger, depression, sadness, whatever it is. But you know, lonely is just something that God can understand and can work with, and bring you alongside people who will help you to erase that, and and break bread, and iron sharpens iron, and wisdom and friendships and all the rest. So yeah, that's it.
All right. Um, I hear that you have a podcast of your own. Is that right?
Yes,
What's the name of your podcast?
it's Dina Council Community Update. So it's kind of bi-weekly, and it's goes out through Radio Honolera, and it's just whatever happens in council, maybe something that's happening in our community that I put it out there, in conversation, no judgment, just this is what's going on. And let's think about it, let's discuss it, and let's see if there's a solution among us to help. Yeah, and so that's what it is.
And that's all about the Pasadena Council, City Council, right?
Yeah, it's about Pasadena City Council, what happens in council, major points, and what's happening in communities. Sometimes, if the council's not on, then something might be happening in community that we talk about.
Fantastic. Well, Florence, thanks for taking time to share your story, to share your life with us. You've been a significant partner with Schweitzer over the years, especially in our community impact ministries, and you've been a coach to a few folks around Schweitzer. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing your life with us today.
Amen. Thank you for asking.
A big thank you to Florence for sharing her story. As we listen to Florence, I hope that you were inspired, encouraged, and challenged, that you might begin to behold the really cool people who are around you, and that you might celebrate them. The Really Cool People podcast is produced by Schweitzer Church, Springfield, Missouri. Taylor Likes is our executive producer and editor, and I'm your host, Jason Leininger. You can help us by liking this, reviewing it, and sharing this podcast with people you think would find it helpful. Until next time, have a great day.